Hello and welcome to the Sacred Masculinity podcast. Today's topic is about what does it mean to take responsibility? I'm going to be sharing some of my own journey around this because I've been doing a lot of work around this concept in the last few weeks. And it's interesting because when we talk about the word responsibility, you might think like, well, what does that mean? Like it means being a responsible adult, for example. Sure. But I think that responsibility, when it pertains to men and the work that men are doing, is really key and crucial. Because a man who does not take responsibility for his life is basically abdicating his masculine energy, his his inner sacred masculine energy. And he's doing it because for a number of different reasons. I mean, when we think about it, a person who does not take responsibility for their lives, what is it that they look like? It's someone who is playing the victim. They're always finding a reason for why a situation hasn't worked out the way that it hasn't worked out. They're feeling bad about themselves. They might be looking at their situation and being like, well, like I hate this job and I feel helpless. I mean, that's a good one for me because that's where I've been at before. And I'll be talking about that in a bit. But when we shift from this perspective of being a victim and we shift toward responsibility, we take on a different kind of energy. It's one where we're stepping up and stepping forward, where we're saying, like, okay, I'm going to make mistakes. We all make mistakes, and there's going to be situations that occur in life where I don't have control over everything around me. In fact, in all honesty, it's good to acknowledge and admit that, what, I don't have control over pretty much anything around me. I don't have control over other people. I don't have control over, anything else. But what I do have control over, what I can take responsibility for, is myself and how I show up in the world. And that's what it means to take responsibility for yourself. It's looking and it's asking myself, how do I want to approach the situations that I'm in my life? How do I want to approach the people in my life? I can't control how someone feels about me, for example. If someone doesn't like me, they don't like me. I can't do anything about that. If someone is interested or attracted in me, same thing. Like that, they're interested and attracted in me. I mean, I can do something about it in terms of how I show up. I can be flirty, all that other stuff. But at the end of the day, that person still has to decide if they're actually attracted to me or not. And I think that this is an area like where men feel helpless a lot of the times. And it probably doesn't help that in a lot of ways men have been let off the hook. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that it's like we can point and say, well, that man over there is the way he is because of patriarchal values. Well, yes, that's a factor for sure. But what happens when a man says, you know what? I'm the way that I am in part because of how I've chosen to show up in my life. And I recognize how I've been shaped by other people. I think it's really crucial to recognize that part of it because the truth is we have been shaped by people. We're not like individuals that are strictly self-formed. I mean, I grew up in an environment where I had a dad and a mom and a stepmom, and all three of those people had an effect on me. My brother had an effect on me. Other people had an effect on me. So that's true. There is truth to that. But what do I do with that effect? How do I claim my own autonomy, my own identity? That's part of what it means to be responsible. At a certain point, you look at your life and you start saying, how do I want to show up? Who do I want to be? I may not be the most I may not be like, the person that I want to be. So what do I do about that? And this was a realization that I came away from. I mean, really, a year and a half ago, like I started doing the men's work, right? And part of that was because I was like, I don't like the person that I am. I'd just been broken up with. And while I could easily point and play the victim and say that that relationship failing was all that other person's fault, it really wasn't. There were actions that I did, there were choices that I made that were just as significant as what that other person did. And I mean, I'm not going to let that person off the hook and not say that there weren't problems there. There clearly were. But at the same time, I've got to acknowledge my own problems. And part of my own problem is that I got into a relationship way too soon after getting divorced. I had no business being in a relationship with somebody else a few months after being in a divorce, after getting divorced. I needed to be focusing on myself and discovering who I was. I didn't do that. I delayed it by a year, and then I was kind of like, well, I have to do this. Like I have to change my patterns here. I have to figure out who I am and what I really want. And I don't know what that looks like because I've been in relationship with other people. And the thing is when you're in a relationship with somebody, that relationship bleeds over into your identity. It's not a bad thing, but it's a reality. It can be a bad thing depending on how much it bleeds over. I mean, if you end up in a codependent dynamic, hello, been there, done that, you definitely have to examine how much your identity is being shaped in a way where you're basically abdicating who you are in favor of who you think that person wants you to be. And a lot of the time, if you were to ask that person who what their thoughts would be, honestly, they'd be more focused on themselves because most people typically tend to be more focused on themselves than the other person, even the person they're with. This is a reality. So what does it mean to be responsible? For me, what it means to be responsible is that I start living life on my own terms as much as possible. And when I'm not living life on my own terms, I look at why I've allowed that. Why have I allowed that situation to occur? What has that given me? Why am I continuing to be there? Like, if I'm not happy with that situation, for example, then why am I still there? A good example for me would be my day job. I don't like my day job. And I've been reflecting on that, and I've been like, well, what am I going to do about it? And I have a way forward. I've figured that out. But I had to really sit with that and be like, you know what? I'm complaining and whining and bitching about a job I don't like. But who put me there? It wasn't my manager. It wasn't anyone else. It was me. I made that choice. I chose to work at that job, and I did it because I wanted to make more money. I did it because I felt like, okay, these are the career options that I have available to me, so I may as well make the most of this. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that because once I started taking that responsibility, I started being like, well, I may not like this job, but how I show up matters. So for as long as I'm at this job, I'm going to start showing up and taking charge of my experience instead of whining and complaining and everything else. I'm going to start really being like, okay, today's that day. I'm working today. I'm going to choose how I show up with the people that I work with the customers that I work with, all that other stuff. And I'm going to make it the best I can because if I act like I'm a victim here, I'm not a victim. I chose to work at that job. No one no one forced me. No one grabbed my arm and twisted and said you have to work at this job. No one put a gun to my head. No one did anything else along those lines. And this is really important. And it to be clear here, like that I am creating the reality of that job in one sense. I don't have control over the other people I work with or the customers, but I do have control over how I show up at that job. So if I'm showing up with a bad attitude, then that job is going to feel worse. And I know because I've gone into that job some days where I'm like, ugh, I don't want to be here. And that day has dragged. And then I've gone into the job and I've been like, I'm going to have a good day today. And that day has gone by quickly. The perception of time was really based in part on my attitude. So, what does it mean to show up? What does it mean to take responsibility? These are the questions that I think about when I think about, you know, my job, or when I think about the relationship that I'm in, or when I think about my friendships, or when I think about my relationship with myself. Okay. What does it mean to take responsibility? It means that I am choosing the way that I show up in the world. I am choosing how I approach my situation. I am choosing the way that I want to show up and be present in the world. That's what it means to take responsibility. And what really brought this into focus was that a few weeks ago, I started taking a class. And in that class, the first module, which I'm not done with yet, I haven't even looked at the other modules, but the first module is all about taking responsibility. And the guy says, spend a month working on this and don't like go to the next modules until you've worked with this for a month. So I'm almost there. But I've really sat with that and I'm like, there's a lot of truth to this. Like the more I look at my life, I'm seeing like, oh, here's the areas where I have given away responsibility, where I've played the victim, where I've let someone else say this is how you ought to feel, or this is the way you ought to show up. And I'm like, no, no more. I'm not doing that. Like, I am not giving away my sense of responsibility to other people. I am not playing the victim anymore. I am not going to act like I have no choice or no control over my life, because the truth is I do. I have choices in how I show up in my life. And the only person telling me I don't have that choice is me a lot of the time, most of the time. I'm not saying that there aren't other people who occasionally will show up and have a vested interest maybe in making me feel a certain way, or trying to make me feel a certain way, because there's truth to that. But at the end of the day, taking responsibility for myself means I am choosing how I show up in my life. I'm choosing to choose myself instead of choosing other people. And it's interesting because here's a great example. Today I got a haircut. And I came home and my girlfriend looked at it and she didn't really like it. She's like, I don't really like your haircut. She's like, I don't want to be honest. Like, I don't want to say this and like be mean. I'm like, just be honest. Just tell me. Like, it's just, she's like, I don't like your haircut. I don't like the way it looks. I don't like the way that you kind of went and got some stuff changed. I'm like, okay, fair enough. And I was like, I can be okay with that. I can be okay with her not liking the haircut. And just as importantly, I can be okay with the fact that I like the haircut. And that at the end of the day, it's my hair, my head, my identity. And I'm all right with her not liking it. It's not gonna really, it's not gonna matter in the grand scheme of things whether she likes my haircut or not. What matters is that I like it. I'm choosing myself. I'm taking responsibility for myself. And I'm even taking responsibility for how I respond to her. I just told her, be honest with me. Like, tell me the truth. Like, what are you thinking? So she's like, I don't like your haircut. I'm like, okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for that honest opinion. Like, I appreciate it. And it felt empowering to be able to say that to her and be like, I don't like, like I care that you don't like it, but I don't care so much that it's going to stop me from not liking it. I'm going to choose to like my haircut because at the end of the day, that's what matters to me. And this is what it means to take responsibility for our lives, where we're able to ground into ourselves, and instead of letting other people influence us and hold sway over us and push us off of our foundation, we're able to say, you know what? I can be solid. I can be where I'm at, and you can have your feelings, and I'll hold space for those feelings. But I'm not going to let those feelings stop me from being true to myself. And here's an interesting aspect to that too. Part of stepping into the sacred masculine is being able to step into responsibility. There's nothing sexier than a man who takes responsibility, because a man who takes responsibility is confident in himself. He knows himself, and he knows that he has what it takes to go out there in the world and do whatever it is he needs to do. A man who is confident in and of himself is a man who can take the slings of the world and keep moving forward. And he might feel a moment of fear or doubt or anxiety or anything, and that's normal. But he doesn't let that feeling take him over. He takes responsibility because he's like, I am responsible for myself. No one else is going to make me feel this way. He's able to create the container, the sacred masculine container that allows for the wildness of the world and at the same time brings a sense of order. And some people will hear this and think, oh, he's getting patriarchal. No, that's not it, because I don't subscribe to patriarchal values. What I do subscribe to is that there is a certain polarity at place at times. And when we lean into that polarity, we find that there's a natural energy that goes with it. For me, stepping into my masculine energy and getting comfortable with that energy allows me to ground myself and be fully present and aware without necessarily feeling like I have to be moved. And I can be moved. I can feel emotions. I can be vulnerable. I can open up. And yet at the same time, I can be confident in and of myself that I like the way that I am showing up in the world. And this is something where I used to never really feel this way about myself. I would spend so much of my life trying to fit into what I thought other people wanted for me. And it never worked. I wasn't happy. Whereas I feel a level of happiness both in terms of the men's work and connecting with other men and holding space with them, and in terms of showing up in my life and the way that I handle situations, and then adding in this layer of responsibility. It's like, well, I'm responsible for myself. I'm responsible for the way I show up. I'm responsible for how I manifest in the world. And granted, there are going to be situations that are going to be out of control. Like a relative could die or a friend could die, and I'm going to be sad and upset. And then I'll be like, okay, and now I can move forward. Like I can grieve and then I can move forward. Or I'll get a haircut and someone else won't like it. And I'll be like, okay, that's cool. And I'm happy with it. I'm the one who has to live with it. I take responsibility for it. So it's like, really, when you show up a certain way, your life transforms. You take charge of yourself. You're not going to be so easily swayed. You're not going to have people get to you. And this is really crucial in terms of establishing yourself as a man who is comfortable and present and aware and who doesn't get swayed, who can hear what somebody else says, can acknowledge what they're feeling, and let them be vulnerable, and at the same time can be like, I'm good. I'm solid. I can handle this. I can acknowledge where you're coming from. I can acknowledge what you're feeling. And I can still be confident in myself, and I can show up in the world and take charge. And this has been a game changer for me. These last few weeks, it's been interesting to just observe and recognize how taking on this particular attitude has shaped me so in such a way where I feel like a new person. I feel more confident. I feel more directed and focused. And I'm like, yeah, I know what I want. And I'm willing to take responsibility for all of that. So I recommend that to any of you, like if any of you men that are watching this, like if you're feeling out of control with your life, step back. Look at how you're giving away that control, not of everything around you. Like you're never going to be in control of everything around you. Let that go. That's patriarchal thinking right there. But you do have the choice to be in control of yourself and how you respond to situations. And that allows you to choose the outcome. And the outcome may not always be ideal. But if you can choose an outcome where you're like, I can take responsibility for this and I can be 100% behind it, then that's really what matters. So that's what it means to take responsibility. And it's something that I'm going to be exploring more in my class Beyond the Breakup. So if you're interested in what I'm sharing here, then I highly recommend checking that out. Thanks for watching.